only 70 years from the time of the destruction of the first temple and the end of the first Commonwealth. So why didn't they go back to naming the months as they had been named in the time of the Bayis Rishon? They should say, so this would be Chodesh Revi, the fourth month of the year. Why should they call it Tamuz? So this is discussed by many of the poskim in the Middle Ages. It's not a main shaila that they asked, but it was a curious one. And so they said a few ideas. One idea was that was simply what the people were accustomed to. If for 70 years you're going to call the fourth month Tamuz, and you want to reestablish a Jewish life, and you want to have Rosh Chodesh, you want to have the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, etc., so you have to deal with what they are familiar with. And if you told them you have to say Chodesh Revi, they wouldn't know what you're talking about anymore. And therefore they compromised with them, so to speak, and they left the non-Jewish name, the Babylonian name, even the name of the Avodah Zarah, and they let it go. That's one idea. That really deals with the acculturation of the Jewish people, which is a constant factor throughout all of Jewish history. Is that even though we separate ourselves from the nations of the world, we are part of the culture that surrounds us, and that is inescapable. The second idea had to do simply with the Jews in Bavel. Most of the Jews at the beginning of Bayis Sheni still remained in Bavel. Ezra, when he led the Jews back to Eretz Yisrael, Zerubbabel, etc., so only 42,000 Jews came back, which meant that at least 500,000, maybe even more, stayed in the Babylonian and Persian exiles. And therefore, if Eretz Yisrael was going to have a connection, as it had to have a connection with the diaspora, and since the diaspora was 10 times as numerous and was very influential, so therefore, so to speak, Eretz Yisrael had to pattern itself according to what the Roman minion of Klal Yisrael was, and therefore they let the names of the month remain. And maybe that's what the Gemara, they say that's what the Gemara means, that Shemos HaChodoshim Olu Imoem Mebavel. The names of the months came back with them when they came from Bavel back there in Israel. And they never were able, or maybe never made the attempt to restore the original months, to restore that it should be by the number, Rishon, Sheni, etc. They never made an attempt to do so. And they left it this way. And it remains this way until today. Even though today, I'm certain that most people are not aware, many, I shouldn't say many, there are some Sikh people who are unaware of the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu never called it Tamuz. And that's an acculturation that came with the Golus above. So we read another great change that occurred that the Gemara itself discusses, is that Ezra Sofer, when he changed the font, the shape of the letters of Hebrew, when they came back from Bavel and Bayis Sheni, In Bais Rishon, the font was called Ksav Ivri. And Ksav Ivri is familiar. It's similar to Phoenician script, and it is very similar to what later Greek looked like, the alphabet. So in the entire time from the Ovos, from whenever the Jewish people began until the Churban Bayis Sheni, Churban Bayis Rishon, the Jews wrote Ksav Ivri. So the Shaila arose, what did their Sefer Torah look like? Was it written B'Ksav Ivri? Because the Gemara says that later he changed Ksav Ivri to Ksav Ashuri, which is the Babylonian script, which is more or less the script that we have today. And we all know how medagdik we are in the Sefer Torah today, that every letter should be written perfectly, and that even the letters that require crowns have to have the crowns to it. Tagin, the Gemara says Rebbe Kiva darshan the Tagin. So what was it? What was it before then? And how did he change it? And why did he change it? And then the Shaila arose, it's discussed about it in the Achronim, was whether or not on the Luchos, it says, Michtav Elohim, Choris ala Luchos. The Kaviochel Rebbeinu Shalom inscribed the tablets of stone that Moshe brought down from Sinai. What did it look like then? What was it, Ksav Ivri? Was it Ksav Ashuri? So there's a shita in the Rosh. The Rosh says, it says it by tradition, doesn't give any sources, that Ksav Ashuri always existed. His shita is that the Luchos were also the Ksav Ashuri, but the Ksav Ashuri was restricted to the Sifrei Torah. In other words, the people wrote Ksav Ivri. That was the handwriting, the font that was used throughout. But when it came to the holy books, to mezuzahs, tefillin, parshas from the Torah itself, that was written B'Ksav Ashuri. The other Rishonim disagree with him, but there's a Yerushalmi that they quote that's against it. Because the Bavli says, so they say it's really a machlokas, the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. It's two different traditions within the Jewish people. Because the Bavli says that on the Luchos there were many miracles. And one of the miracles is that the Mem and the Samach Benes Hoyomdim, because the Luchos were through and through. So if you have a Samach, so what held the middle? So there was like a magnetic force that held the piece in the middle, that it didn't fall. And the same thing was true in the Mem. So that says Benes Hoyomdim. The Gemara, the Bavli, so the Bavli obviously is talking that the Luchos were Ksav Ashuri. And that would be in line with what the Rosh says, that Ksav Ashuri was preserved for holy things, whereas the Ksav Ivri was the everyday font. However, we have a Yerushalmi that says that the ayin and the pei were the two letters B'Ksav B'Mnes Hoyomdim, because in Ksav Ivri the ayin is a circle and the pei is a square. So they were the ones that were B'Nes Hoyomdim. So obviously they're of the opinion that the luchos were in Ksav Ivri, and that Ksav Ivri was therefore used even for Sifrei Torah, for everything B'Shebikdusha, because that was the Ksav and the luchos. So if you say, like the Rosh said, if we adopt the first opinion, so it's understandable, the Gemara that says that Ezra was able to change at the beginning of the Bayis Sheni from Ksav Ivri to Ksav Ashuri, because he's talking about the font of everyday business, the font of correspondence of everyday. The Hebrew alphabet in our time also has undergone changes, how it looks. So it's not a big deal. But if you say the other's idea that the luchos were Ksav Ivri and the Sifrei Torah were Ksav Ivri, so then how did Ezra change it? So again, there are those that say that that was like the Eis Lasos Lashem, and nobody knew Ksav Ivri anymore. What's the use of having a Sefer Torah that nobody can read, that nobody knows? And therefore Ezra, as he did many other things to save the Jewish people, the Gemara says, "Yomole lo nitna Torah al yirei Moshe, nitna al yirei Ezra." If there would never have been a Moshe Rabbeinu, the backup position, Ezra would have done it. So that's really Moshe ad Ezra lo kom ke Ezra. Ezra really doesn't get his due in the popular mind. So Ezra said that if nobody can read it, so then it's a museum piece. It's not a Torah's Chaim. It's not something that'll be read on, and that's why he was masakin the reading the Torah, the Parshias. The whole thing was in order to revive Torah amongst the Jewish people. So therefore he changed the font. That's a very radical idea, but it has proofs from various sources as to how it happened. Over the centuries, there have been different fonts for Hebrew. We have what's known as Rashi Ksav, which Rashi never saw. The Rashi Ksav was a Spanish, the Sephardim wrote Hebrew either in Arabic characters, like the Rambam. The Rambam wrote Hebrew with Arabic characters so that people could read it. That's the way they read it. Or they wrote it in this Ksav because they didn't want to use Ksav Ashuri. They wanted to reserve that only for holy things. So they wrote it in this Ksav. It became Ksav Rashi because when the printers came along and they wanted to differentiate the text from Rashi's commentary, they had to use a different font. So they took that font. Now Rashi also had a font that's Gothic, that's German. Looks like the Gothic Ksav. And it was a Hebrew alphabet. And then in our time you have a cursive way of writing Hebrew. So all of this is part of the development of the Jewish people, part of the interesting things. So I was reminded of it regarding the name of the month of Tamuz.